Okay, so here's the situation. I'm making this simple shmup game where the enemies move down the screen and my goal is to kill them before they hit the bottom. If they do hit the bottom, I lose a life. I have code for when the enemies go off the screen in my enemy code, and I have the code for losing a life in my lives manager, but I can't figure out how to connect these two things. This is where the event bus pattern comes in. This is a super powerful programming pattern that allows nodes to react to other nodes even when they're not directly connected in the node tree. In this video, I'll teach you how to set up an event bus, show you when you should use it and when you shouldn't, and show you some examples from actual projects I've worked on. The example code will be available on GitHub, and there will be timestamps if you want to just jump around the video. Okay, let's get into it. Okay, first things first, what is an event bus? An event bus is just an auto-loaded singleton with a bunch of signals. Because it's an auto-load, any node can access it to connect to or emit those signals. Like I said earlier, this is super useful for allowing a node to react to an event in another node, even if the nodes are super disconnected and don't know anything about each other. Basically, one node will emit the signal from the event bus when something happens, then any other node can connect to that signal and react to that event without even knowing about the first node. So let's actually write the code to see this in action. The actual event bus code is super simple. First, you'll create a script that inherits from node, then just add your event signals. For this example game, I just need one right now that I'll call enemy reached bottom. You'll notice I'm not calling it lose life or something like that, and that's because I like to name my event bus signals after actual in-game events, not the functionality that happens in response to that event. This may seem a little pedantic, but if I want to change it so the player loses just health when the enemy reaches the bottom or loses an item or something, I don't have to change the name of the event. Now that we have the event bus code, we need to make it an auto load. To do this, you go to project settings, globals, and then add your script. Now that it's globally available, let's actually hook it up. In my enemy code, I have this function that runs when the enemy goes off screen. So here to emit my new event, I'll just call eventbus.enemyreachedbottom.emit. This code does exactly what it looks like. It just emits the signal from our event bus. Now, if we go into the lives manager and in the ready function we connect to that event, we can then create the function onEnemyReachedBottom, and in it we can subtract 1 from our lives. Let's print to the console when this happens just to test it and see it in action. If we run the game and wait until an enemy reaches the bottom, you'll see the print statement there. So it's a success. And that's the basics of the event bus. It really is a very simple yet powerful pattern. Let's go through one more example just to really drive the point home. In my example game, I have this UI that shows how many lives the player has, but currently it doesn't really do anything. It has no way of knowing how many lives the player has and when those lives change. This seems like a perfect opportunity to use our event bus again. First, we'll create a new event. So in our event bus script, we'll write player lives changed. Again, here I'm naming it after a global event rather than any functionality that runs because of that event. Then in our lives manager, we'll create a setter for a lives variable, and in that setter, we'll emit our event bus signal for player lives changed, and we'll pass in the new lives. Now we can go back to the lives UI, and in the ready function, connect to our new event and just set the lives. Now let's see it in action. If we wait for an enemy to reach the bottom of the screen, we will see our print statement and our lives UI also changed. Awesome. Now, just to emphasize how common this pattern is, I thought I'd quickly take you through some scenarios in real projects I've worked on where I've used the event bus pattern. Okay, so here's the event bus in my game house in hand. I'll just take you through a couple of them to give you an idea of the kinds of things I generally use event buses for. First thing you may notice is all of these warning ignore statements. Since the event bus script doesn't actually emit the signals itself, it'll throw a warning about unused signals, and I hate warnings, so I just ignore them all. I actually just learned you can put the warning ignore at the top of the file instead of a bunch of individual ones, but I'll just fix that later. A lot of these are pretty game specific. The score ones at the top are pretty self-explanatory, but I feel like the interesting ones are here at the bottom with the request floating text events. This is something I'll do in a lot of games. I have a top-level canvas layer that handles floating text, and then any node that needs some floating text can just request it. I use the term request because it implies there's no guarantee that the floating text will happen. Another cool thing about this pattern is that if I don't want to show the floating text, like if we're in a cutscene or something, the node requesting the floating text doesn't have to know about that. It can still just request the floating text, and then the canvas layer can decide whether we actually show it. Here's another quick example from Perpetual Potions, a game I made with Connor from Sunday Brunch Studios for the Godot Wild Jam 92. The most important events here are probably the recipe completed and recipe added. A quick little trick I use all the time is if you highlight the code and then hit Control-Shift-F or Command-Shift-F, I think on Mac, it'll open the global find menu, and if you search for the event, you can easily see all the spots it's used. This is particularly helpful for event buses. Here we have the recipe manager emitting the event, so that makes sense. Then we can see that the main game scene also connects to it here, and we can click into that code and see what it does. Pretty neat. Now, the event bus pattern is super useful, and like I said, I use it in pretty much all of my projects, but it's not a silver bullet, and there are definitely some downsides. The biggest downside to the event bus is the global monolithic nature of it. Maintaining a massive script with hundreds of signals can be a nightmare, and because any node can emit and connect to these signals, it can lead to hidden dependencies and super obscure bugs. Because of this, I generally think of the event bus as sort of a last resort. There are various ways to avoid using the event bus for everything that go beyond the scope of this video, like dependency injection, the mediator pattern, the command pattern, etc. But the long and short of it is, just be disciplined when using the event bus, and only use it for events that are truly global. Another pitfall that I personally run into is that it's hard to orchestrate stuff with the event bus. For example, imagine I have an event called request explosion, and when my player dies, I want to request the explosion. Then once the explosion is complete, I want to queue the player node for deletion. So the player emits the request explosion signal, but since by design the player knows nothing about the explosion, it has no way to know when the explosion animation is finished to run its queue-free function. This is kind of a contrived example, and there are obviously a lot of easy solutions to this problem, but it showcases the problem I'm talking about. Event bus events are really fire and forget, meaning after you emit them, it's hard to follow up on whatever happens. Even with the pitfalls, I'm sure that you can see this is a super useful pattern. It's also really easy to implement in Godot. If you have any questions, feel free to drop them in the comments and I'll do my best to answer them. And let me know what you thought of this video. Are there any other programming patterns you want me to cover? Let me know. Anyways, thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.